It had been 8 years since Liam married Sarah, the woman he once believed was his soulmate. Their relationship had started like a scene from a fairy tale, full of love, laughter, and unwavering trust. Liam had been drawn to Sarah's kindness, her charm, and the way she seemed to see the world with unshakable optimism. Together, they had built a life they both cherished, or so Liam had thought. Liam worked as a marketing executive for a multinational company, a demanding job that often kept him late at the office or traveling for weeks at a time. Sarah, a freelance designer, worked from home and often joked about how lucky she was to avoid the grind of office life. They lived in a quaint suburban house, surrounded by neighbors who envied their seemingly perfect relationship. But cracks had begun to form, small and barely noticeable at first. Sarah had started to change. Her once affectionate demeanor seemed distant. She was spending more time on her phone, texting late at night, and giggling at jokes Liam wasn't privy to. At first, he brushed it off, telling himself it was probably just a new friend or her working on a particularly challenging project. He wanted to believe that the woman he loved couldn't betray him. The first real seed of doubt was planted 2 months ago. Liam had come home early from a business trip, hoping to surprise Sarah. When he walked into the house, he found her on the couch, her phone clutched tightly in her hands. She seemed startled, quickly locking the screen and tucking the phone away as she smiled nervously. "You're back early," she said, her voice higher pitched than usual. Liam kissed her on the cheek, but the unease stayed with him. Later that evening, he noticed Sarah texting again. She angled her phone away, her eyes darting toward him every few seconds. "Who's that?" Liam asked casually, trying to keep his tone light. "Oh, just Vanessa," Sarah replied, referring to her closest friend. "She's going through some stuff." But Liam wasn't convinced. Vanessa was the type to call, not text, especially about anything serious. Still, he told himself not to overthink it. Weeks passed, and Sarah's behavior only grew more suspicious. She started dressing up more often, even when she said she was just meeting friends or running errands. Her phone, once left lying around the house, was now always with her. She started taking calls in other rooms, her voice hushed as she spoke. Liam's mind began to wander to dark places. Was there someone else? Was she hiding something? One night, as Liam lay awake in bed, he decided to check their shared credit card statement, something he rarely did. What he found left him uneasy. Expensive dinners at restaurants they had never been to together, charges from a boutique hotel in the city, and gifts he hadn't received. Confronting Sarah wasn't easy. He didn't want to seem paranoid or controlling, so he approached the situation carefully. "Hey, I noticed some charges on the credit card," he said one evening, trying to sound casual. "Were you treating yourself to something special?" Sarah didn't flinch. She shrugged and replied, "Oh, those? I went shopping for Vanessa's birthday, and we grabbed dinner afterward. I didn't think you'd mind." Her answer was plausible, but the tightness in her voice and the way she avoided his eyes told a different story. Liam started paying closer attention. He began keeping track of her behavior, when she left the house, how long she was gone, and who she claimed to be with. He noticed discrepancies. One evening, Sarah said she was going to a yoga class, but her workout gear was still neatly folded in their closet when Liam checked. The turning point came when Liam found an earring under the passenger seat of Sarah's car. It wasn't hers. It was a dainty gold hoop, completely unlike the jewelry Sarah usually wore. When he asked her about it, she looked genuinely flustered. "Oh, that must be Vanessa's," she said quickly. "She borrowed my car the other day." Liam nodded, pretending to accept the answer. But something inside him broke. He couldn't ignore the mounting evidence any longer. His wife, the woman he had trusted with his heart, was hiding something, possibly someone. As the days turned into weeks, Liam's emotional state deteriorated. He felt like a stranger in his own home, constantly questioning every word, every gesture, every excuse Sarah gave. He began losing sleep, his mind racing with scenarios he didn't want to believe were true. One day, while Sarah was out, Liam decided to search the house. He felt a pang of guilt as he rummaged through drawers and closets, but his need for answers outweighed everything else. In the back of Sarah's wardrobe, tucked beneath a pile of sweaters, he found a shoebox. Inside were handwritten notes, love letters. The handwriting wasn't his. The letters were passionate, filled with declarations of love and intimate details about moments Liam had no knowledge of. His hands trembled as he read them, his vision blurring with tears. In that moment, everything clicked: the secretive behavior, the late-night texts, the phone calls, the unexplained absences. Sarah was having an affair. Liam sat down, his head in his hands, as a wave of anger, sadness, and betrayal washed over him. He wanted to confront her immediately, but he knew he needed to stay calm. He needed a plan. This wasn't just about Sarah's betrayal. It was about reclaiming his dignity and ensuring the truth was known. That night, as Sarah slept soundly beside him, Liam lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He vowed to gather more evidence, to make sure there was no way for her to deny it when the time came. This was no longer just about saving their marriage or understanding why she had done this. It was about exposing her lies, no matter the cost. The days that followed were some of the most emotionally draining in Liam's life. Knowing the truth, but still pretending everything was normal in front of Sarah, took a toll on him. Every time she laughed, every time she kissed his cheek, he felt the weight of her betrayal pressing down on his chest. But he forced himself to play the part of the unsuspecting husband, biding his time as he worked toward uncovering every shred of her infidelity. Liam started by examining the notes he had found in the shoebox. The handwriting was neat, confident, and distinctly masculine. There were phrases in the letters that sickened him, lines about stolen weekends and how much the mystery man loved Sarah's smile. The words cut deeper than any physical wound. Yet, they also fueled Liam's determination. He decided to install a small GPS tracker in Sarah's car, something discreet she wouldn't notice. It was a step that made him uncomfortable, but Liam justified it by reminding himself of the lies she had spun. He also began discreetly checking her phone whenever she left it unattended. Most of the messages had been deleted, but a few stray notifications gave him leads. A text from Mark W. with just a heart emoji was the first clue. That name, Mark, repeated itself in various ways. Liam noticed it in her phone's contacts and even on their shared calendar, where Sarah had once scheduled a work lunch that coincided with charges from an upscale restaurant. He couldn't believe how brazen she had been, hiding the affair in plain sight. One evening, Liam's suspicions were confirmed when the tracker he'd placed in her car alerted him to a location far from their usual neighborhood, a hotel downtown. Sarah had told him she was meeting Vanessa for drinks, but the GPS didn't lie. Liam sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, torn between driving to the hotel and confronting her or continuing to gather evidence. He chose the latter. The next day, Liam reached out to an old friend, Ethan, a private investigator. They hadn't spoken in years, but Ethan didn't hesitate to help. Liam handed over the letters, the credit card statements, and the GPS data. Ethan promised to keep everything discreet and assured Liam that he'd have concrete proof soon. As the days passed, Sarah's behavior became even more suspicious. She started coming home later, claiming that work deadlines were keeping her busy. When Liam suggested they spend more time together, she brushed him off, saying she was too stressed. Her excuses were flimsy, but Liam played along, careful not to reveal his hand too soon. A week later, Ethan delivered a folder filled with damning evidence. Photos of Sarah and Mark at the hotel, holding hands at a cafe, and even kissing in a park. Liam's chest tightened as he flipped through the images. There was no denying it now. Sarah wasn't just lying to him. She was living a double life. That evening, as Sarah sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, Liam watched her from the doorway. He couldn't decide what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the ease with which she pretended everything was fine. He clenched his fists, swallowing the anger that threatened to spill over. "Sarah," he said, keeping his voice steady. She looked up, startled. "Yeah. I've been thinking," he began, sitting across from her. "Do you feel like we've been distant lately?" Her expression shifted, her eyes darting away for a moment before she forced a smile. "I mean, maybe a little, but that's normal, right? You've been busy with work, and I've had my own stuff going on." Liam nodded, pretending to accept her answer. "Right. I just feel like we're not as connected as we used to be." Sarah set her phone down and reached for his hand. "Don't overthink it, babe. We're fine. Every couple goes through phases like this." Her words sounded rehearsed, hollow. Liam felt a surge of anger, but forced himself to smile. Yeah, maybe you're right. Over the next week, Liam carefully laid the groundwork for his plan. He began subtly reaching out to Sarah's family, reconnecting with her parents and siblings. They had always been fond of him, often saying he was the best thing that had ever happened to Sarah. It wasn't difficult to arrange a casual dinner at their house, something Sarah initially agreed to but later tried to back out of. "I'm just swamped with work," she said one morning, sipping her coffee. "It's your parents," Liam replied, feigning disappointment. "They're excited to see us. Can't you make time for one evening?" Sarah hesitated, then sighed. "All right, fine. But I can't stay late." The day of the dinner arrived, and Liam brought the folder of evidence with him, carefully tucked into his briefcase. He felt a pang of guilt as he thought about what he was about to do, but he reminded himself that Sarah's choices had brought them to this point. At the dinner table, everything seemed normal at first. Sarah's parents were their usual warm selves, chatting about work, family gossip, and plans for the holidays. Sarah, however, seemed distracted, glancing at her phone every few minutes. Midway through the meal, Liam decided it was time. He cleared his throat, setting down his fork. "I need to say something," he began, his voice steady but firm. Everyone turned to him, their expressions curious. Sarah froze, her eyes widening slightly. "There's been something going on in our marriage," Liam continued, looking directly at Sarah. "Something I've been struggling with for months." "Liam, what are you talking about?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with nervousness. "I've been trying to figure out how to bring this up," he said, pulling the folder from his briefcase. "But I think the truth needs to come out now." He opened the folder and slid the photos across the table. The room fell silent as Sarah's parents and siblings leaned forward, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock. "Sarah has been having an affair," Liam said, his voice breaking slightly. "I didn't want to believe it at first, but the evidence is right here." Sarah's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her father's face turned red with anger. "Sarah," her father said, his voice low and shaking. "Is this true?" Sarah's face was pale, her eyes darting between the photos and her family. It's not what it looks like," she stammered. "Liam, why would you do this here? We could have talked about this privately." "You mean the way you've been sneaking around behind my back?" Liam shot back, his voice rising. "You lied to me, to all of us. I thought you deserved to face the truth in front of the people who love you most." Her father slammed his fist on the table. "Sarah, I raised you better than this. How could you betray your husband like this? How could you disgrace this family?" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "I made a mistake, okay? But Liam isn't perfect either. This isn't about me." Liam interrupted. "This is about you breaking our vows, lying to me, and disrespecting everything we've built together." Sarah's siblings looked at her with disappointment, shaking their heads. Her mother began to cry, muttering, "How could you do this, Sarah?" Sarah stood abruptly, knocking over her chair. "I don't have to listen to this," she shouted, storming out of the dining room. The silence that followed was heavy. Liam sat back, his hands trembling slightly. Sarah's father finally spoke, his voice filled with quiet anger. "Liam, I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve this." Liam nodded, grateful for their support, but too exhausted to speak. That night, Sarah's family made it clear where they stood. They would no longer support her unless she took full responsibility for her actions. Sarah had been disowned. The drive home from Sarah's parents' house was silent. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her phone, usually glued to her hand, lay untouched in her lap. Liam kept his eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The weight of everything that had unfolded at dinner pressed heavily on both of them, though neither spoke a word. When they finally arrived home, Sarah bolted from the car and slammed the door behind her, leaving Liam to follow at his own pace. Inside, she paced the living room, her anger barely contained. "How could you do that to me?" she demanded, spinning to face him as he walked in. Liam dropped his keys on the table and looked at her, his face a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. "How could I do that to you?" he echoed, his voice calm but laced with bitterness. Sarah, you've been lying to me for months. I didn't do anything to you. You did this to yourself. You embarrassed me in front of my family, she shouted, her voice cracking. Do you have any idea how humiliated I feel? Liam took a step closer, his eyes locking onto hers. Humiliated? You think this is about your embarrassment? What about me, Sarah? What about the months I spent wondering if I was losing my mind, doubting myself because I trusted you? What about the years I devoted to you, only for you to throw it all away for? What? Some fling? Sarah looked away, her jaw tightening. It wasn't just a fling, she muttered. The words hit Liam like a punch to the gut. He stared at her, his expression shifting from anger to something closer to disbelief. What did you just say? It wasn't just a fling, Sarah repeated, her voice quieter now. I love him, Liam. I didn't plan for this to happen, but it did. Liam felt the air leave his lungs. The woman he had loved, the woman he had built his life with, was standing in front of him and admitting she loved another man. The reality of it was too much to process. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at her. Then, without a word, he turned and walked to the bedroom, shutting the door behind him. The next morning, Liam woke up to an empty bed. Sarah's side was cold, untouched. He found her in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up briefly when he entered but said nothing. I want you to leave, Liam said, his voice steady. Sarah froze, her cup halfway to her lips. What? I said I want you to leave, he repeated. Pack your things and go. This marriage is over. Liam, you don't mean that, she said, setting the cup down. We can work through this. People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake, Sarah. Liam interrupted, his tone sharp. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying something you didn't mean in the heat of an argument. This was deliberate. You lied to me, you betrayed me, and now you're telling me you're in love with him? There's nothing left to work through. Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but Liam didn't waver. He had made his decision, and there was no going back. You can stay with him, he added, his voice cold. Or maybe your family will take you in, though I wouldn't count on that. Sarah flinched at his words. She opened her mouth to respond but seemed to think better of it. Instead, she turned and walked out of the room. Over the next few days, Sarah began packing her things. The house, once filled with their shared memories, now felt empty and cold. Liam avoided her as much as possible, retreating to the guest room while she stayed in the master bedroom. One evening, as Liam sat in the living room scrolling through his phone, he received a text from Sarah's father. We're so sorry you had to go through this, Liam. Please let us know if there's anything we can do to help. Liam stared at the message for a long time before typing a reply. Thank you. I appreciate it. It was a small comfort to know that Sarah's family supported him, but it didn't erase the pain of what had happened. The final confrontation came on the day Sarah left. She stood in the doorway, her suitcases by her side, looking at Liam as if she expected him to say something, anything, that might change her mind. But Liam just stood there, his arms crossed over his chest. Liam, she began, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. I know I hurt you, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. He didn't respond, his expression unreadable. I hope someday you can forgive me, she continued, tears streaming down her face. Liam took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. I'll never forgive you for what you did, Sarah, but I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. Goodbye. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway. A few moments later, he heard the sound of her car starting and driving away. As the silence settled over the house, Liam felt an overwhelming mixture of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, and a faint glimmer of hope. For the first time in months, he felt like he could finally begin to heal. The house was quieter than it had ever been. Every sound echoed: a creaking floorboard, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint rustling of wind against the windows. Liam sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where Sarah's favorite throw blanket used to be. The reality of her absence began to sink in, not as a sharp pain but as a dull, persistent ache. He glanced at his phone, half expecting a message from her, but there was nothing. She had been gone for 3 days, and the silence between them was absolute. It was strange to think that the woman he had once shared everything with was now just a stranger with memories. That night, Liam went through the house, removing the last remnants of Sarah. The photo frames on the mantel, the little notes she used to leave on the fridge, even the mug she always used for her morning coffee. He packed it all into a box and shoved it into the closet. It was a painful process, but it felt necessary, like clearing out a wound so it could finally heal. The next morning, Liam woke up to another text from Sarah's father. "Just checking in. How are you holding up?" Liam hesitated before replying. He didn't want to burden them with his struggles, but he also didn't want to lie. "It's been tough," he wrote, "but I'm getting through it. Thanks for asking." Moments later, his phone buzzed again. "We're here for you, Liam. You'll always be part of this family, no matter what." The message brought a lump to his throat. He hadn't expected their support to extend beyond that night at the dinner table, but their kindness felt genuine. It reminded him that not everything had been lost. In the weeks that followed, Liam focused on rebuilding his life. He threw himself into work, taking on extra projects and volunteering for tasks that kept him busy. The long hours were exhausting, but they kept his mind from wandering to places he didn't want to go. Outside of work, he started reconnecting with old friends, people he had drifted away from during his marriage. One of them, Jake, insisted on taking Liam out for drinks one Friday night. "You need this," Jake said, clinking his glass against Liam's. "Trust me, a night out with the boys is the best cure for a broken heart." Liam wasn't sure he believed that, but he went along with it. The bar was loud and crowded, the air thick with laughter and music. For a few hours, Liam allowed himself to forget, to lose himself in the camaraderie of friends who reminded him of who he was before his life had unraveled. By the end of the night, he felt lighter, not healed, but a little closer to finding himself again. Meanwhile, word of Sarah's affair had spread within her family and social circles. Liam hadn't intended to make her indiscretions public, but the dinner confrontation had set off a chain reaction. Her parents were deeply ashamed, and her siblings, once her closest allies, had distanced themselves from her. Sarah, now living with Mark, found herself increasingly isolated. The reality of her choices began to weigh on her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Mark was attentive at first, but the excitement of their affair quickly faded when it was no longer forbidden. Their relationship became mundane, riddled with arguments about everything from finances to household chores. One evening, as Sarah sat alone in their small apartment, she picked up her phone and stared at Liam's contact name. Her thumb hovered over the call button, but she couldn't bring herself to press it. She knew there was no going back, no undoing the damage she had caused. Instead, she sent a text. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you find happiness." Liam saw the message late that night. He read it twice, his emotions a mixture of anger, sadness, and a strange sense of closure. He didn't reply. As time passed, Liam began to find joy in small things again. He started running in the mornings, something he hadn't done in years. The rhythmic pounding of his feet against the pavement was therapeutic, a way to clear his mind and focus on the present. He also took up cooking, experimenting with recipes he'd always been too busy, or too unmotivated, to try. His first attempts were mediocre at best, but he found solace in the process. It was a reminder that life, like cooking, was about trial and error, about finding the right balance. One evening, as he sat down to a dinner he had prepared himself, Liam looked around the dining room. It was the same room where he and Sarah had shared countless meals, but it felt different now, emptier, but also more peaceful. He realized that he was beginning to enjoy his own company, something he hadn't done in a long time. A month later, Liam received an unexpected email from Vanessa, Sarah's best friend. "Hey Liam, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for not telling you what I knew sooner. I didn't want to get involved, but I realize now that staying silent only made things worse. I hope you're doing okay." Liam stared at the screen, debating whether to reply. In the end, he typed a short message. "Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate it. Take care." It wasn't much, but it felt like another step forward, a way to close yet another chapter of this painful ordeal. One Saturday morning, as Liam sat on his orchestra sipping coffee, He felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in months. The sun was warm on his face, and the world around him seemed alive with possibilities. He realized that while Sarah's betrayal had shattered his world, it hadn't destroyed him. He was still here, still standing, and still capable of rebuilding. For the first time, he allowed himself to think about the future, not as a continuation of the past, but as something entirely new. Months passed, and Liam began to find a rhythm in his new life. The once overwhelming silence of the house no longer felt suffocating. It had become a peaceful reprieve. The spaces that had felt like reminders of Sarah were now his own. He had redecorated the bedroom, painting the walls a calming shade of blue and replacing their shared bed with one he'd picked out himself. It was a small but symbolic act of reclaiming his space and his identity. His mornings started with a jog through the park, where he'd grown familiar with the sights and sounds of life waking up around him. The routine brought him clarity, a sense of control over his days that he hadn't felt in a long time. It was during one of these runs that Liam bumped, literally, into a woman walking her dog. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, fumbling to steady herself as her golden retriever wagged its tail enthusiastically at Liam. "No, it's my fault," Liam replied, catching his breath. "I wasn't paying attention." The woman smiled, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "Well, Charlie here doesn't seem to mind," she said, gesturing to her dog. Liam chuckled and bent down to pat the retriever's head. "He's a good boy." "I'm Emma, by the way," she said, extending her hand. "Liam." They shook hands, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Liam found himself smiling, genuinely, without the weight of sadness lurking in the background. The encounter with Emma was brief, but it lingered in Liam's mind for the rest of the day. There was something refreshing about her openness, the way she carried herself with an easy confidence. He didn't want to overthink it, but the idea of meeting someone new, of possibly opening himself up to the idea of companionship again, wasn't as daunting as it had once been. Later that week, as he was walking through the park again, he spotted Emma and Charlie. She waved, and Liam found himself walking over to say hello. Their conversation was light, filled with laughter and shared anecdotes about the park's quirks. Emma told him she was a graphic designer who worked from home, and Liam shared a bit about his job in marketing. It wasn't deep or life-changing, but it was enough to remind Liam that connection was still possible. Meanwhile, Sarah's life had taken a different turn. The relationship with Mark had fallen apart after just 3 months. The spark that had once made their affair so thrilling had fizzled in the face of reality. Mark had grown distant, and Sarah found herself feeling more alone than ever. Her attempts to reconcile with her family had been met with cold indifference. Her father, once her staunchest supporter, refused to take her calls. Her mother had sent a single message: "We're disappointed, Sarah. You need to take responsibility for your actions." Sitting in her apartment one night, Sarah scrolled through old photos on her phone. Images of her and Liam smiling at family gatherings, vacations, and quiet nights at home. The guilt she had tried to suppress came rushing back, overwhelming her. She composed an email to Liam, pouring out her regrets and asking for forgiveness. She didn't expect him to take her back, but she wanted him to know she was sorry. When Liam received the email, he read it carefully, his emotions a mix of pity and detachment. Sarah's words were heartfelt, filled with remorse and an acknowledgement of the pain she had caused. But for Liam, it wasn't enough to undo what had been broken. He took a deep breath and began typing his response. "Sarah, thank you for your message. I can see that you're hurting, and I appreciate your honesty. I hope you find peace and happiness in your life, but I've moved on. I'm working on building something new for myself, and I think it's best if we leave the past where it is. Take care. Liam." He hit send and felt a strange sense of relief. It was the final chapter of a story he no longer needed to carry with him. Over the next few months, Liam and Emma continued to cross paths at the park, their conversations growing longer and more personal. One evening, Emma invited Liam to join her for coffee at a nearby cafe. They sat by the window, sipping lattes and talking about everything from childhood memories to their favorite books. Emma had a way of making Liam feel at ease, her laughter infectious and her insights thoughtful. As the evening stretched on, Liam realized he hadn't thought about Sarah once. It was a small revelation, but a meaningful one. When they parted ways, Emma gave him a warm smile. "I'm glad we bumped into each other," she said. "Me too," Liam replied. Liam didn't rush into anything with Emma. He was careful, taking the time to understand his own feelings and ensure he wasn't using her as a way to fill a void. But as the months went by, their connection deepened, and Liam found himself looking forward to their time together more and more. One day, as they walked through the park hand in hand, Emma turned to him and said, "You seem lighter these days, like you're finally free of whatever was weighing you down." Liam smiled, her words resonating deeply. "I think I am," he said. "It took a while, but I've learned that sometimes losing something can make room for something better." As Liam stood on his porch that evening, watching the sunset, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The pain of Sarah's betrayal was still a part of his story, but it no longer defined him. He had faced the worst, and he had come out stronger, more self-aware, and ready for whatever life had to offer. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And for the first time in a long time, Liam felt hopeful, not just for the future, but for the present.